In regard to the construction of verse, Mallarmé has always remained faithful to the traditional syllabic measurement, but the freak or the discovery of le vers libre is certainly the natural consequence of his experiments upon the elasticity of rhythm, upon the power of resistance of the caesura. Le vers libre, in the hands of most of the experimenters, becomes merely rhythmless, irregular prose. In the hands of Gustave Cain and Edouard Dujardin, it has, it must be admitted, attained a certain beauty of its own. I never really understood the charm that may be found in this apparently structureless rhythm until I heard, not long since, Monsieur Dujardin read aloud the as yet unpublished conclusion of a dramatic poem in several parts. It was rhymed, but rhymed with some irregularity, and the rhythm was purely and simply a vocal effect. The rhythm came and went as the spirit moved. You might deny that it was rhythm at all, and yet, read as I heard it read, in a sort of slow chant, it produced on me the effect of really beautiful verse. But Monsieur Dargin is a poet. Vers libre in the hands of a stylist are the most intolerably easy and annoying of poetical exercises. Even in the case of Le Pèlerin Passionné, I cannot see the justification of what is merely regular syllabic verse, lengthened or shortened arbitrarily, with the Alexandrine always evident in the background as the foot rule of the new meter. In this hazardous experiment, Monsieur G. Maraz, whose real talent lies in quite another direction, has brought nothing into literature but an example of deliberate singularity for singularity's sake. I seem to find the measure of the man in a remark I once heard him make in a cafe, where we were discussing the technique of meter. "You, Verlaine," he cried, leaning across the table, "have only written lines of 16 syllables. I have written lines of 20 syllables." And turning to me, he asked anxiously if Swinburne had ever done that, had written a line of 20 syllables. That is indeed the measure of the man, and it points a criticism upon not a few of the busy little littérateurs who are founding new reviews every other week in Paris. These people have nothing to say, but they are resolved to say something, and to say it in the newest mode. They are impressionists because it is the fashion, symbolists because it is the vogue, decadents because decadence is in the very air of the cafes. And so, in their manner, they are mileposts on the way of this new movement, telling how far it has gone. But to find a new personality, a new way of seeing things, among the young writers who are starting up on every hand, we must turn from Paris to Brussels, to the so-called Belgian Shakespeare, Maurice Maeterlinck. Monsieur Maeterlinck was discovered to the general French public by Monsieur Octave Mirabeau in an article in the Figaro, August 24, 1890, on the publication of La Princesse Maline. Monsieur Maurice Maeterlinck nous a dans l'œuvre le plus génial de ce temps, et le plus extraordinaire et le plus naïf aussi, comparable est, oserais-je le dire, supérieur en beauté à qu'est-ce qu'il y a de plus bon dans Shakespeare, plus tragique que Macbeth, plus extraordinaire et pensé que Hamlet. That is how the enthusiast announced his discovery. In truth, Monsieur Maeterlinck is not a Shakespeare, and the Elizabethan violence of his first play is of the school of Webster and Tournier rather than of Shakespeare. As a dramatist, he has but one note, that of fear. He has but one method, that of repetition. In La Princesse Maline, there is a certain amount of action which is certainly meant to reinvest the terrors of Macbeth and of Lear. In L'Intruse et les Aveugles, the scene is stationary, the action but reflected upon the stage, as if from another plane. In Laissez Présence, the action, such as it is such stuff as dreams are made of, and is literally, in great part, seen through a window. This window, looking out upon the unseen, an open door, as in L'Intruse, through which death, the intruder, may come invisibly. How typical of the new kind of symbolic and impressionistic drama which Monsieur Maeterlinck has invented. I say invented a little rashly. The real discoverer of this new kind of drama was that strange, inspiring, incomplete man of genius whom Monsieur Maeterlinck, above all others, delights to honor, Villiers d'Isle-Amand. Imagine a combination of Swift, of Poe, and of Coleridge, and you will have some idea of the extraordinary, impossible poet and cynic who, after a life of brilliant failure, has left a series of unfinished works in every kind of literature. Among the finished achievements, one volume of short stories, Contes Cruels, which is an absolute masterpiece. Yet, apart from this, it was the misfortune of Villers never to attain the height of his imaginings, and even Axel, the work of a lifetime, is an achievement only half achieved. Only half achieved, or achieved only in the work of others, for, in its mystical intention, its remoteness from any kind of outward reality, Axel is undoubtedly the origin of the symbolistic drama. This drama, in Villers, is of pure symbol, of sheer poetry. It has an exalted eloquence which we find in none of his followers. As Monsieur Maeterlinck has developed it, it is a drama which appeals directly to the sensations, sometimes crudely, sometimes subtly, playing its variations upon the very nerves themselves. The vague spiritual fear, which it creates out of our nervous apprehension, is unlike anything that has ever been done before, even by Hoffmann, even by Poe. It is an effective atmosphere, an atmosphere in which outlines change and become mysterious, in which a word quietly uttered makes one start, in which all one's mental activity becomes concentrated on something, one knows not what, something slow, creeping, terrifying, which comes nearer and nearer, an impending nightmare. La Princesse Mélène, it is said, was written for a theatre of marionettes, and it is certainly with the effect of marionettes that these sudden, exclamatory people come and go. Mélène, Hajmar, Ugliane, these are no men and women, but a mask of shadows, a dance of silhouettes behind the white sheet of the Chat Noir, and they have the fantastic charm of these enigmatical semblances, luminous, gem-like, ghost-like, with also their somewhat mechanical eeriness. The personages of L'Intrus, of Les Aveugles, in which the spiritual terror and physical apprehension which are common to all Monsieur Maeterlinck's work have become more interior, are more abstractions, typifying age, infancy, disaster, but with scarcely a suggestion of individual character. In the style itself is a sort of abstraction, all the capacities of language being deliberately abandoned, for a simplicity which, in its calculated repetition, is like the drip of a tiny stream of water. Monsieur Maeterlinck is difficult to quote, but here, in English, is a passage from Act 1 of La Princesse Mélène, which will indicate something of this biblically monotonous style. I cannot see you. Come hither, there is more light here. Lean back your head a little towards the sky. You too are strange tonight. It is as though my eyes were open tonight. It is as though my heart were half open tonight. But I think you are strangely beautiful. But you are strangely beautiful, Ugliane. It seems to me that I have never looked on you till now. But I think you are strangely beautiful. There is something about you. Let us go elsewhither, under the light, come. As an experiment in a new kind of drama, these curious plays do not seem to exactly achieve themselves on the stage. It is difficult to imagine how they could ever be made so impressive, when thus externalized, as they are when all is left to the imagination. L'Intrus, for instance, which was given at the Haymarket Theatre on January 27, 1892, not quite faithfully given, it is true, seemed, as one saw it then, too faint in outline, with too little carrying power for scenic effect. But Monsieur Maeterlinck is by no means anxious to be considered merely or mainly as a dramatist, a brooding poet, a mystic, a contemplative spectator of the comedy of death. That is how he presents himself to us in his work. In the introduction which he has prefixed to his translation of L'Ornement des Noces Spirituelles of Ruysbroeck l'Admirable, shows how deeply he has studied the mystical writers of all ages, and how much akin to theirs is his own temper. Plato and Plotinus, Saint Bernard and Jacob Boehme, Coleridge and Novellis, he knows them all, and it is with a sort of reverence that he sets himself to the task of translating the astonishing Flemish mystic of the 13th century, the 1200s, known till now only by the fragments translated into French by Ernest Hello from a 16th century, 1500s Latin version. This translation and this introduction help to explain the real character of Monsieur Maeterlinck's dramatic work, dramatic as to form, by a sort of accident, but essentially mystical. Partly akin to Monsieur Maeterlinck by race, more completely alien from him in temper than it is possible to express, Joris Karl Huysmans demands a prominent place in any record of the Decadent movement. His work, like that of the Goncourt, is largely determined by the maladie fin de siècle, the diseased nerves that, in his case, have given a curious personal quality of pessimism to his outlook on the world, his view of life. Part of his work, Marthe, Les Survatards, Un Ménage à Volo, is a minute and searching study of the minor discomforts, the commonplace miseries of life, as seen by a peevishly disordered vision, delighting, for its own self-torture, in the insistent contemplation of human stupidity, of the sordid in existence. Yet these books do but lead up to the unique masterpiece, the astonishing caprice of Albert Bourse, in which he has concentrated all that is delicately depraved, all that is beautifully, curiously poisonous, in modern art. Albert Bourse is the history of a typical decadent, a study indeed after a real man, but a study which seizes the type rather than the personality. In the sensations and ideas of Des Esseintes, we see the sensations and ideas of the effeminate, over-civilized, deliberately abnormal creature who is the last product of our society, partly the father, partly the offspring, of the perverse art that he adores. Des Esseintes creates for his solace, in the wilderness of a barren and profoundly uncomfortable world, an artificial paradise. His Thébauld raffinée is furnished elaborately for candlelight, equipped with the pictures, the books, that satisfy his sense of the exquisitely abnormal. He delights in the Latin of Apuleius and Petronius, in the French of Baudelaire, Goncourt, Verlaine, Mallarmé, Villiers, in the pictures of Gustave Moreau, the French Burne-Jones, of Odilon Redon, the French Blake. He delights in the beauty of strange, unnatural flowers, in the melodic combination of scents, in the imagined harmonies of the sense of taste, and at last, exhausted by these spiritual and sensory debauches in the delights of the artificial, he is left, as we close the book, with a brief, doubtful choice before him, madness or death, or else a return to nature, to the normal life. Since Albert Bourse, Monsieur Huysmans has written one other remarkable book, La Basse, a study in the hysteria and mystical corruption of contemporary black magic. But it is on that one exceptional achievement, Albert Bourse, that his fame will rest. It is there that he has expressed not merely himself, but an epoch. And he has done so in a style which carries the modern experiments upon language to their furthest development. Formed upon Goncourt and Flaubert, it has sought for novelty, l'image peinte, the exactitude of color, the forcible precision of epithet, wherever words, images, or epithets are to be found. Barbaric in its profusion, violent in its emphasis, wearying in its splendor, it is, especially in regard to things seen, extraordinarily expressive, with all the shades of a painter's palette. Elaborately and deliberately perverse, it is in its very perversity that Huysmans' work, so fascinating, so repellent, so instinctively artificial, comes to represent, as the work of no other writer can be said to do, the main tendencies, the chief results, of the decadent movement in literature. Such, then, is the typical literature of the decadence, literature which, as we have considered it so far, is entirely French. But those qualities which we find in the work of Goncourt, Verlaine, Huysmans, qualities which have permeated literature much more completely in France than in any other country, are not wanting in the recent literature of other countries. In Holland, there is a new school of sensitivists, as they call themselves, who have done some remarkable work. Couperus, in Ecstasy, for example, very much on the lines of the French art of Impressionism. In Italy, Luigi Capuana, in Giacinta, for instance, has done some wonderful studies of morbid sensation. Gabriel D'Annunzio, in that marvelous, malarious Picard, has achieved a triumph of exquisite perversity. In Spain, one of the principal novelists, Senora Pardo Bazan, has formed himself, with some deliberateness, after Goncourt, grafting his method, curiously enough, upon a typically Spanish Catholicism of her own. In Norway, Ibsen has lately developed a personal kind of impressionism in Hedda Gabler and of symbolism in The Master Builder, opening the door, in his own phrase, to the younger generation. And in England, too, we find the same influences at work. The prose of Mr. Walter Pater, the verse of Mr. W. E. Henley, to take two prominent examples, are attempts to do with the English language something of what Goncourt and Verlaine have done with the French. Mr. Pater's prose is the most beautiful English prose which is now being written, and, unlike the prose of Goncourt, it has done no violence to language, it has sought after no vivid effects, it has found a large part of mastery in reticence, in knowing what to omit. But how far away from the classic ideals of style is this style in which words have their color, their music, their perfume, in which there is some strangeness in the proportion of every beauty? The studies in the Renaissance have made of criticism a new art, have raised criticism almost to the act of creation, and Marius the Epicurean, in its study of sensations and ideas, the conjunction was Goncourt's before it was Mr. Pater's, and the imaginary portraits, in their evocations of the Middle Ages, the Age of Watteau, have they not that morbid subtlety of analysis, that morbid curiosity of form, that we have found in the works of the French decadents? A fastidiousness equal to that of Flaubert has limited Mr. Pater's work to 6 volumes, but in these 6 volumes there is not a page that is not perfectly finished, with a conscious art of perfection. In its minute elaboration, it can be compared only with Goldsmith's work. So fine, so delicate is the handling of so delicate, so precious a material. Mr. Henley's work in verse has none of the characteristics of Mr. Pater's work in prose. Verlaine's definition of his own theory of poetical writing, sincerity and the impression of the moment followed to the letter, might well be adopted as a definition of Mr. Henley's theory or practice. In A Book of Verses and The Song of the Sword, he has brought into the traditional conventionalities of modern English verse the note of a new personality, the touch of a new method. The poetry of Impressionism can go no further, in one direction, than that series of rhymes and rhythms named In Hospital. The ache and throb of the body in its long nights on a tumbled bed, and as it lies on the operating table awaiting the thick, sweet mystery of chloroform, are brought home to us as nothing else that I know in poetry has ever brought the physical sensations. And for a sharper, closer truth of rendering, Mr. Henley has resorted, after the manner of Heine, to a rhymeless form of lyric verse, which in his hand certainly is sensitive and expressive. Whether this kind of verse libre can fully compensate in what it gains of freedom and elasticity for what it loses of compact form and vocal appeal is a difficult question. It is one that Mr. Henley's verse is far from solving in the affirmative, for, in his work, the finest things, to my mind, are rhymed. In the purely impressionistic way, do not the London Voluntaries, which are rhymed, surpass all the unrhymed vignettes and nocturnes which attempt the same quality of result? They flash before us certain aspects of the poetry of London, as only Whistler had ever done, and in another art. Nor is it only the poetry of cities, as here, nor the poetry of the disagreeable, as in Hospital, that Mr. Henley can evoke. He can evoke the magic of personal romance. He has written verse that is exquisitely frivolous, daintily capricious, wayward and fugitive as the winged remembrance of some momentary delight. And, in certain fragments, he has come nearer than any other English singer to what I have called the achievement of Verlaine and the ideal of the decadents, to be a disembodied voice, and yet the voice of a human soul.